All right, everyone. Welcome in the Body Movement. We're back. Today we have Dr. Sheila Patel from Chopra Medical. There's my younger sister, Allison Sinikowski, doctor of physical therapy, up in the dungeon, the lab, the lair of Saratoga, New York. Here I am from the Upper East Side of the Big Apple, New York. And Dr. Sheila Patel is out in the lovely, sunny, comfortable, cool, year-round San Diego, California. Thanks for joining us. Good to have you.
Thanks for having me. I'm really excited for.
Yeah, we talked about a month ago. This is an area of interest for me. Everything that you're into, that we'll get into. Just the alternative medicine space that's associated with Chopra Medical, but you are also a primary care physician here in the States, practicing family. So this blend of Western medicine versus, and I would love your take on this. Is the stuff that with Chopra, alternative medicine, the pseudoscience that gets kind of lumped in with that stuff, for all this stuff that's been around for centuries and thousands of years, is it aptly named? Is it fairly classified and all that stuff? And how you blend those two things will be a topic of conversation today. But as a formal intro, Dr. Sheila Patel is the Chief Medical Officer of Chopra Medical and just the Chopra business. Deepak Chopra, as everyone knows, is well known in meditation and yoga, alternative medicine, herbal treatments, mindfulness, peacefulness. The guy's got between 2 and 5 million followers, depending on what platform you go on. So he's well known, best-selling books, made famous by Oprah. Great story. And Sheila's his Chief Medical Officer. So again, thanks for joining us. I'd love maybe just a quick start for our listeners. Where is Chopra today in the medical landscape? Maybe the mission of the company, and then I've worked in corporate America. I've supported the C-suite, but I've never had a chief medical officer in our business. So maybe how that role fits into Chopra, where you fit in with your practice, and then we can get into the more personal stuff of how you operate. But kind of that 30,000 foot view to kind of ground everyone in our conversation going forward here.
Yeah, absolutely. So Chopra Global is the company now. It started with Deepak Chopra's work. And as you said, he's definitely a pioneer in the, what I think used to be called alternative medicine.
Yeah.
And people have kind of moved away from that in the field, because it's really doesn't have to be an alternative. It used to be called that because 20 years ago, 30 years ago, if people weren't in the embracing fully like the Western medical model and just taking whatever meds they were told to, and whatever procedures that the doctors recommended, they had to go outside of the system, and it was considered alternative, like you're choosing an alternative.
Yes.
And what's really evolved now, thankfully, is this idea of integrative medicine, or sometimes people call it holistic. Because a lot of these so-called alternative systems, they're really embracing parts that aren't included in Western medicine, like body, mind, spirit,
right?
Which in medicine we mostly treat, the physical plane. So in a lot of Eastern traditions, what we do at Chopra is very much based on this traditional healing system called Ayurveda, which is, traditionally was first described in India thousands of years ago, but it's very similar to many healing systems around the world: Peruvian medicine, the traditional Hawaiian medicine, Tibetan and Chinese medicine. They all have these concepts of like body, mind, spirit, that we're more than just a physical molecules, And so the idea is so sometimes it's called holistic medicine, or complementary. So integrative and complementary medicine. These are all terms that are used now to sort of give that idea that you can dip your toe in all different things. You can access Western medicine and also holistic healing traditions and practices, and integrate that into your healing. And I find, after doing this, with Chopra for 11 years now, and as you mentioned, I have a primary care practice. I see patients in a regular medical office once a week.
Sure.
That integration is really the key to really transforming your health. And everyone's different. Everyone's going to respond to a different, treatment modality or treatment plan.
Yep.
And it really should be in alignment with how people want to, treat their health.
Right.
And so why not integrate all of the things out there? And again, coming back to your question about what we do,
Yeah.
unfortunately, not all places in Western medicine, medical systems, doctors, even bring up these conversations. It's basically, oh, you have this symptom, take this medicine,
Yep.
which again, I practice Western medicine, so I know that there are places that it's really
When the
vital.
situation calls for it, right? Yeah, of course.
Absolutely. And
Yeah.
and sometimes my job is like talking people into, doing some Western healing modalities as well.
Yep.
And so that's been my experience, that integrating all of these things is really the way to go. And as chief medical officer at Chopra, what I do, again, to your point of, I think 30 years ago, people used to think this was woo woo or pseudoscience or pseudomedicine. Now there's so much research going on in, now, of course, meditation, yoga and how it impacts the nervous system, breathing practices,
Yeah.
and even all the little daily practices in Ayurveda, cleaning your tongue and oil pulling and all the, kind of things that sound wacky. There's now scientific, explanations for why that would benefit us, and so
Yep.
my job is really to bring in that groundedness in yes, these things are validated, there is evidence behind these practices, and how we speak to them so that it doesn't seem super woo woo. And that's
Right. Yeah,
really my passion, is taking these traditional practices and making them really accessible. And that's another thing, at Chopra, we want to make these practices accessible. Like, how can we bring them into our day-to-day lives now?
Right.
It doesn't,
Right.
and it doesn't have to look like how people did it 1,000 years ago or thousands of years ago.
Right.
These practices are applicable today. And so, basically our mission is teaching people practices in their lives that create personal transformation. And then out of each person's personal transformation, that creates social transformation, because you start to evolve and then want to make the world a better place too.
Yeah.
So
I love the integrated idea of it. We just had a weight loss body transformation expert on prior episode, who's in the strength training and whole foods diet, and Allison's in PT. But there's this, and everyone said, even for the same person in the same demographic of the same age, with the same ailments, the solution may not be the same. There's no cookie cutter thing. And your blend of integrating those two things based on probably a deep analysis, getting to know that patient, becomes much more important. And if you have more assets on your tool belt, you can kind of pick and choose those things. Test and learn is a lot. And my role on this podcast, as I've said 100 times already in our first few episodes, is I'm just a fitness health enthusiast. I'm bringing on experts because I like to consume all this. And throughout my life, I found great benefits of just picking and choosing from workout programs that are more endurance based versus flexibility versus strength, picking and choosing those things that work for me through trial and error. And I don't even know if I have like a formal program, but finding what works. And to see professionals, it feels like it's probably been a part of that, but it's been more of a focus to really finding those, doing that upfront work with the patient, finding where the loopholes are in their habits and their history and their medical background, and then working with them on a comprehensive solution. And if you have these ancient things versus these ancient practices that are gaining traction versus traditional Western medicine as we know it, it feels like you can develop more comprehensive programming, solutions to their ailments. And I'm sure I see that the more involved you get in it year after year.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that drew me to, how we talk about medicine and health and at Chopra, and based on in this Ayurvedic principle, is that it's personalized.
Yeah.
So in Ayurveda, there's this concept of different mind body types. That's just part of the system. Whereas in medicine, we kind of, doesn't matter like who you are, we find if your symptoms fit a certain category of disease, then we treat the disease. And it's really like about looking at these symptoms within this individual and treating the person, and so that really made sense to me. And in my practice as a primary care physician, I started out just practicing conventional Western medicine, and I was good at it. And you can be, but I felt like there was something missing, and not just missing like what to offer my patients. They would come back to me after being sick or being in the ER and like, okay, how can I avoid this from happening again? Or where do I go from here? And certainly all the mental health issues, anxiety, depression, insomnia, all of those things where your labs might look good, but you don't feel well.
Yeah.
And then I sit there and like, I don't know where to go from here, but I know there are other things out there. So I kind of went on my own journey and exploration and made the switch,
Yeah.
to help my patients, but also I learned that it helped me. I'm so much more excited to do what I do than, being another burned out physician who's uninspired, just, diagnosing and prescribing.
Yeah.
It's relatively simple, and it's the patient-centered approach, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, and that is in the musculoskeletal world, like the thing right now, right? Like that is the hype right now in the musculoskeletal world, in the pain world. It's like, well, it's got to be patient-centered. And I always have two questions, like when did it not become patient-centered? Like exactly. The patient should have been the person the whole time. The patient-centered approach isn't new. Some of which I think we're finding is lack of training in certain areas.
Sure.
That people don't understand that. And then, I feel we're in the midst of like bridging the gaps. And I love that you said that we try to get away from like alternative and holistic. It's just you like what works.
Yeah.
I remember talking to somebody and I said something about nutritional testing. I'll think of the word in a second, but response testing, nutrient response testing we were talking about. And I said, I was talking about it with him. I'm like, it's a little hocus pocus. And he's like, but I'm into hocus pocus. I was like, me too. So that's why it jives for me, right? Where somebody else might sit there and be like, oh, this is weird. And if it doesn't sing to you, then find something else.
Absolutely.
And I think that whole approach of what works for you is just so lost in our whole world, and trying to get everybody back to that page is really important.
Yeah, there's like the old way of all these traditions and just kind of the factory farming way, or the industrial line, factory line of getting patients in and out of practice, that I think still is just like, it's still there. And the community of us doing this, you practicing this and making and Chopra making it more visible in the world, like that unification of people that are just trying to do it right isn't there yet. So it's not this marketing machine that is the traditional system where, and I'd be curious to Allison's question, when did you kind of notice this was off the rails? When do you think it went off the rails? I'd like to know. But it's, there's also the consumer aspect. Like, we're so into buzzwords and branding as a consumer here in the States, where alternative sounds cool and like, oh, I'm doing something. I know something that other people don't, and it feels trendy, and you get away from actual outcomes. Even yourself as a patient, you're like, oh, I just want to try this because I think it will be cool and I'll know something nobody else does. So there's a consumer side, which is my representation here on the podcast, but getting the experts saying, all right, cut the branding, cut the bullshit around advertising and fads and trends, and really just get to how do you feel better. So there's that side for like people like me. And when I talk to my friends, oh, I'm doing this diet, like, oh, I heard this, like that stuff spreads very virally by word of mouth. And it's, I don't think that's a good thing. So, platforms like this, we're trying to, just chip away at that. Chopra's trying to, do it. So, to Al's question, I'd be interested when you think like this model, was it ever working? Was it a slow burn of stacking bad practices and therapeutics that came? Like, how do you assess like the state?
It's a very complex story. I mean, people have written books about how medicine went awry, and there's no question it has. So when people try to argue that point, it's silly, because we have more chronic illness than ever before. People are sicker than they've ever been. I think for the first time, life expectancy is going down, than over the last several decades. So like, you have to admit, first of all, there's a problem. And I think that's one of the problems, is that a lot of physicians think, like, no, this is the best. Look at all these things. We save lives all the time, blah, blah, blah. But the fact is, we're letting people get to the disease point. Like, we have to focus on prevention. So, I mean, again, yeah, it was one Band-Aid on top of a Band-Aid on top of a misdirect that's really gotten us to where we are now. I think it started with payment, like now in the insurance, I mean, it's great. Obviously, they do help when needed, but certain things aren't covered by insurance. They can, it limits the accessibility for people. Even if I want to send someone, like, I know PTs that, do really great, like evaluations, and really not just kind of prescriptive, really, again, figure out what's the ideal program for this person, but they're out of their network, or they're out of, so people might have to pay. So, that whole thing kind of got a little distorted things. Definitely drug companies, right? And science and materialistic science. So this dependency and almost, pinhole view of science and what that means, and what evidence is, it's like, our current models are designed to study drugs. So it's like, you control two groups, one gets a drug and the other doesn't, and then you make sort of assessments based on how most people did. It's about populations, not individuals. So how we study science and medicine is a very reductionist model. So that kind of, the things that got the most science or evidence behind them were these, things that are like one intervention, whereas lifestyle medicine is like multiple interventions. And that's what most people are doing, or what we would want people to do: improve your nutrition, start moving, do some stress management, whether it's meditation or whatever, going out in nature, etc. So, you're doing multiple things at a time. So even if one practice, doesn't show a huge benefit, when you do it together with other practices, this is what we see: huge transformation, like people getting off of meds, people, losing tons of weight, people feeling calm and sleeping again, and so that, and how we study and provide evidence, kind of didn't help. And then, I think general fear in medicine, like, we know what we're talking about. And, I'm a physician, so I know there's a lot of ego in medicine, and, this is what we know.
It's been exacerbated the past 12, 18 months. We know that, right? Just
sure. Yeah. And, not really wanting to even look at what's out there. And it's really sad, and again, then the medical system, again, with, physicians just cranking out patients and all the things you hear about. And, a lot of healthcare practitioners, you get not enough time with each person because of the payment models. And
I've harped on that.
So it's like multiple things that really are kind of hard to unwind. I mean, I'm still very hopeful, and it's through people, individual practitioners, that just are helping to change the mold a little bit. And then again, like you said, through this kind of grassroots consumer approach, there's definitely disadvantages to, all of these trendy things that are out there. But, that's where what we try to do is bring some groundedness to it. Like, okay, you've heard about fasting. Okay, you've heard about plant-based diets. Now, how does that fit into an overall healthy lifestyle? It's not just one practice, but, each and every one of them have some basis and might be right for a certain person. So,
I was just going to say, with regards to research, I mean, even in PT school, like, PT research isn't good, like, behind any interventions, right? Like, it really isn't. Like, other than eccentric loading for tendinopathy, that's like the one thing that's like grounded, and this is what you do if this is the diagnosis, right? Otherwise, when you're prescribing exercise, the research sucks. And a lot of that is, it's an N of one. Everybody's different. What does this person look like? You can't control all the variables. And then, to your point, based on research, which is invaluable to so many things, requires numbers to be considered good research. Well, how really a great study with a 1 to 10 people? It needs to be hundreds, or, I'm thinking, like breast cancer research, like, for them to change the way that you go about treating, it has to be big numbers with amazing results with everything. when you look at anything beyond that one pinhole intervention, it's impossible. We have to figure out a way to change that and change mindsets. I think, there's nothing worse, I think, than when I have a conversation that, 85% of the population has a disc herniation to somebody with back pain, they're 90% better. And they go back to their physician. They're like, oh, you still have pain. Let's order an MRI. They get an MRI. They're like, oh, you have a disc herniation, and they're just gone. And now they've just lost it because this image showed something we've been talking about when it should never have been ordered in the first place.
Right.
So it's like, why that opposition, and why do providers sometimes feel, I think it's a power thing or lack of knowledge thing that, why wouldn't you say cherry juice is okay to help with inflammation? Like, why would you say, don't do that? Like, oh, you could try it, but that doesn't work. Like, why? Like, why?
Yeah, I know. I hear that from patients all the time. They'll go to different specialists, or, it's one of my big frustrations is when people have GI issues and, okay, yeah, you've looked, they don't have any pathology, which is important to rule out. But then, they'll go back to the GI person and they'll ask, like, well, should I be eating differently? And then they'll literally tell them, diet has nothing to do with this disease. And it's like, wait a minute, are you saying what I put into my gut has nothing to do with what's going on in my gut? That absolutely makes no sense.
Right. Like, that's just common sense. There's there's no research needed for that. Like,
you don't need research, right?
Right.
And I'm sure you recognize all of the issues. I mean, one of my other big beefs is pain management, which so much of it is how you move your body and, many different things. But, we just obviously have done a really bad job at treating pain in this country. And unfortunately, again, a lot of the modalities, because the type of science that people are looking for isn't maybe there. Right. Number one, it's not covered. Number two, physicians think it doesn't work. They are not, going out and seeking out that knowledge. I mean, a lot of physicians I know would like to, but they say, I'm so busy. Like, I'm trying to keep up on all my medical education. How can I go off and do something else?
The structuring of the system, right? Like, just doesn't set you ladies up for success all the time. So you have to break free of it. So there's a ton of common threads, and what Allison just said, I think will tie into, Chopra and what you do with, and if I'm going to say Ayurveda and meditation stuff. So one, Allison, to your point, Allison has broken out of the system. Like you were talking about going to pay, she's cash based because she's out of network because she's finding her patients actually get better. And in the long run, while they have sticker shock, actually spend less money in a shorter time frame. And she's giving them stuff they can do on their own, truly, with her guidance to get better. So that's a re-education. People are like, well, I have health insurance. What the hell do I have it for? Why? Like, if I'm just going to pay you, so that sticker shock, that mindset. And then the other thing she gets to, which, I think we'll get to the mindfulness of Chopra in your practice and this 360 approach, is her initial visits. Often she says, I wish I had a psych code for my billing, because she won't even do a musculoskeletal evaluation. She'll just do 90 minutes of a needs analysis, deep patient history. And a lot of times people just need to vent of what's been going on in their life and what's going on at home and problems. And and we just had the weight loss expert last episode, people just not being confident in themselves. And once they get that venting out, and once they had the opportunity to talk, because they weren't just in your office for 10 minutes, quick, check this, check that, get out, come back in 6 weeks. Once they got that out, they're more receptive and open-minded to hear whatever you have to tell them is constructive feedback, and they come to realizations on your own. So I'm curious if this is a part of your education in part to consumers that come through either your practice, Chopra's outreach, how does it tie into yoga, meditation, Ayurveda, dieting, and because it's so much more labor intensive of doing something like a 90-minute evaluation, or how can you compete with somebody that can get patients in and out at scale? Like, can we treat more people with this model with an N of 1? It's more labor intensive. Do we need, as you look at the landscape and everything you're doing, do we need more doctors and more nurses? Do we need people breaking away from the system and creating holistic, whatever you want to call it, practices, and setting those up, and like what, so that's a huge mountain that I keep bringing up that is almost unscalable at this moment. But so how does that tie into what you're doing? I want to get into your practice and what you're doing, but there's those underlying symptoms that cross everything that Allison just kind of mentioned, and then what we've been hitting on the podcast over the past few episodes.
Yeah, I mean, I think again, it has to come from bottom up and top down, so the consumer, I think that's where we, and Deepak's a physician. He started the Chopra Center here in Carlsbad 20 plus years ago, or in Southern California. First it was in La Jolla here. And David Simon, who was a neurologist and physician, but both trained in meditation and mindfulness practices and Eastern traditions, and wanted to start, that, like they started a Mind Body Institute here in San Diego, but 25 years ago, it was still considered pretty woo-woo. So they said, hey, let's just start our own place where people can really come to heal. Right. And then they decided doctors aren't ready, medical systems aren't ready, let's go to the consumers and teach them these practices, which really our job is empowering people, number one, to become more self-aware. And that's where meditation, yoga, yoga is a great physical, the asanas and the postures are great for many physical issues, but really that mind-body connection, now all the studies on, how it can help the brain and the nervous system, etc. But really, it's a spiritual practice, and that's how we talk about it, that it's really connecting you and making you self-aware what your body is listening. Also, tons of studies that show activates that healing expression shifts from inflammation and a lot of different metabolic issues where you're going more into storage and not weight management. It flips it to gene expression that reduces inflammation, that creates more mitochondrial energy production. Your metabolism shifts because you're going more toward health and longevity. And we have all these abilities inside of us. It's just we don't know how to activate them. And so that's where, again, we teach a lot of meditation and yoga. And also, again, to make people more self-aware, but also plant seeds in people's awareness that you are your best, doctor. You know what's going on in your body.
Yeah.
Yes. These are all different practices that maybe you want to consider. So I get into things that are still considered woo-woo, the right person. Like I just saw someone in my practice the other day, and she came in with her mom, who they both very empathic, and we're looking for a nutrition because their current physician wasn't listening to them. And they kind of were dropping terms with me. And I was like, oh yeah, you're an empath. You're affected by other people's energy, and you're going to be more sensitive to medications. And they were like, oh my God, I can't believe I'm sitting in a doctor's office and we can actually use these terms, and talk about energy in the body and stuff. And people don't get to have those conversations with their doctors. And so part of what we do is let people know, these are real things. And feel free to go out and explore other practitioners that understand that. Yes, you have your doctor. If you need to use them, fine. But there's a whole world out there. And, I really believe in the power of intuition. And when people meditate and do yoga and mindful present moment awareness, mindfulness, it starts to awaken their intuition. So then again, they might look for a bunch of different physical therapists, something, they're like, yeah, that's the person I need to go see.
Right.
So we're really teaching people empowerment, to take their healthcare into their own hands and
our
access all the tools that are available.
Yeah. Our podcast, the Body and Our Body Movement podcast is B.O.D.Y, built on developing yourself. So it's like empower the individual, and I like that mindfulness and accept, making the people be willing. The doctor saying to a patient, I know you've heard this, I know you've read it, maybe you've researched this. I hear you, versus just shutting it down immediately. This is something where, like, again, I've tested cryotherapy, cupping, some other stuff. And I I have a resource down there on the bottom screen, and my sister, and I'll be like, hey, does this work? She goes, if you feel good, you should keep doing it.
Yep.
Exactly. And,
I know. I get a lot of questions, like, should I take this herb? Should I do this? Should I do that?
Yeah.
And, should I fast? Should I do this type of exercise? Whatever it is. And I always say, Ayurvedic practitioner will say it. So let's learn more,
Yeah.
It's usually, there's no black and white, yes, this is good for everyone, or, no, don't do that.
Right.
Yeah, you really have to just try things out.
I get very, very surprised at how many people are scared to stop things. So, like I'll have patients all the time, and you probably see this tenfold, but they've been on glucosamine and chondroitin for 12 years, 15 years, and it's expensive, and it's this and that, and they're having issues. They're with me, so they're having some sort of issue, and they're like, well, I take this, and I don't know, I stopped taking it, and when I stop taking it, then I start hurting. I'm like, okay, then take it. Or like, do you think it has value? I'm like, well, have you ever not taken it? Like, do you know how you feel without taking this? And they're like, no, I'm scared to stop. And I'm like, it really does baffle my mind. And if you might not get a glimpse of me quite yet, but I'm very variable. All right. And I'm up and down, and sideways in a minute. That's just me, my personality. So for me to stick with something, it has to make an impact. So for me to understand the other side of a guardian who won't stop something they were told to start taking 20 years ago, it just baffles me, especially when you're pouring money out the door. So I'm wondering if you hear that a lot or see that a lot of people, fearful of stopping things.
Absolutely. And I see this a lot because people, who are trying out natural therapies and are in this world a bit, they'll be on 20 different supplements. So they bring in their bag of 20 supplements or more. And I'm like, whoa, let's taper these down. And that's where I get into issues where they're like, but I think that's helping for my inflammation. And I'm like, yeah, but you're on 4 different things. So let's narrow it down that we think is best for your inflammation, and then talk about food and all these other things. Because if your food isn't right, if your movement isn't right, if you're not sleeping, you're not meditating or doing other practices, taking all these supplements isn't helping you, Right. But they're very hesitant, and if there's someone who's really attached to a particular supplement, I'm like, okay, let's keep that one, but let's see where we can pare down on other things.
So do you find that the practices of Chopra and yoga and meditation, do you find that you're bringing these up a lot and and when are you bringing them up and trying to implement them into people's lives? Is it, and again, because it's not cookies, so I just imagine you just blast it to everyone that comes in, but where has it been the most applicable in your practice and the patients you see and the type of health consumers you're trying to reach? Look, I've never heard anyone that actually practices meditation say that it's ruining their life. So, so I think it is something at scale. There's many ways to meditate. I've seen some highly influential people, Naval Ravikant, huge entrepreneur. He just talks about, he just does it 10 minutes while he's waiting in the doctor's room. He just closes his eyes and focuses on breathing, and it's not anything formal. And he goes, but it's worked for me for 10 years. So he's like, it doesn't even have to be a TM or, transcendental or, other formal method. So, how often are you bringing it up? How often are you preaching it? Who do you find it's been most beneficial to? Where does Chopra kind of target that messaging towards? Is it a broad message for everyone? Is it chronic disease? Is it all the above, case by case?
It's pretty much everyone. And, I do these 2 things. So I'm, my work at Chopra has to do, there are already people who are accessing that world. Yeah. So they're all coming to learn meditation and yoga and mindfulness and Ayurvedic lifestyle, healthy lifestyle practices. So it's already an open kind of community, So, we teach a mantra-based meditation of our own, but also other types of meditations, breath meditation, just present moment awareness, there's so many, like you said, so many different types of meditation.
Right.
So, they're already, we do events, we have our whole health retreat in Arizona at CIVANA Wellness
Yep.
Resort, where people come for a week or 5 days in an immersion into all of these practices. And then they take the practices home with them and continue them. So that's one population. And Deepak's goal is, or vision is to get 1 billion people meditating. So one person at a time. We
Right,
teach
right.
certifications. So we have all these meditation teachers out there that are also teaching others,
Yeah.
because you reach this critical mass where people's nervous system calms down. They go out of fear and fight or flight, and then they actually start wanting to be of service and helping others and feeling gratitude and compassion, and you're awakening all these qualities. So
This is
one
that
by
ground up
one.
approach.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And then, my top down approach is with my other practice where I see patients. It's an insurance based model. It's a conventional
Yeah.
sort of, office,
Right.
but in the room,
Yeah.
I talk to everyone about stress. What's your stress level? High, low, medium, high. Are you sleeping? How's your
Yeah.
mood? And you
Yeah.
can imagine almost everyone, or pain is a big one too. Almost everyone I see has one of those things. And it's a doorway to say, have you heard about meditation? Do you meditate? It's great. There's all kinds of apps now. So I just
Right.
give people a bunch of resources. Of course, we have our Chopra meditation app,
Yeah.
but there's also many others out there. So I just tell people, find one that works for you.
Right.
Some of the sleep meditations are really guided visualizations that just create relaxation. It's like they turn off the switch.
Yeah.
We have these off switches, we just don't use them. We keep the light on all the time. It would be like leaving our lights on all the time.
Yeah.
And I tell people at the end of your day, you just turn the switch off, just like you do with your lights when you go to bed. And so breathing practices. So yeah, it's a little doorway, and then into introducing these things to people. And it's great to have science, because then you can say, hey, there are thousands of studies that show this helps.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe I'll try it out.
Yeah. How has the science evolved over the past, call it 20, 30 years since, Deepak got onto the scene, where again, it did have, and again, I almost want to stop using, woo-woo or alternative, because you've said like it's grown, it's kind of that stigma's kind of been released, although, there's still some people that will come around to it, need convincing. But how has the science evolved over, say, the past couple decades, where you can give people more grounded information, be like, you really should trust this, and the science isn't just studying a population, right? It's more on these N of one circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, there are thousands and thousands of studies now on meditation, many on yoga. Again, we know people, we work with researchers who are also trying to change the model of research to more whole systems research, rather than, again, this very pinholed approach to research that's based on drugs, and how you study drugs. So it's shifting a little bit, but there are people who are really attached to the current reductionist model will criticize, a lot of studies that are out there that give at least some validation to, different practices. Acupuncture has so many studies that show it improves pain and, for many conditions. And even still, I know a lot of physicians who just still don't believe, or they don't think it's good science or whatever. So a lot of it is just, do you want to be open or not, which is unfortunate that some aren't. But, it's definitely increasing like every day. I think someone told me like the number of studies, doubles every 70 days or something. And granted, there are good studies and there are bad studies. So I'm not going to say that all the studies out there are fantastic, but, they're all setting a stage for developing really good studies and research methods. And also, like some of the research is outside of the Western paradigm, like you can study biofield and energy. So there are people out there, we know researchers who are studying like the electromagnetic field around us. That's, is that an aura? It could be considered, that's what people were talking about, that you can sense this electromagnetic energy that goes outward. And so now technology is getting better. We can measure these things, but people have to be open to the idea that, which I don't know why they wouldn't be. We know there's energy. We don't see electricity, but we know it's running through the wires, know?
Yeah,
I can't imagine, I mean, I've always, like, my dream provider, right? So right now in my personal life, I have an in-network MD, And I always, coach myself and people I'm very close to, like, utilize them, get your yearly physical, this isn't a shot against everything, like utilize them. But then I have, and I don't know if this is considered more of a trendy term or not, but like a functional medicine physician who is almost very similar to you, an MD. She has a practice, and then she has an external out of network practice where she does a lot more through. Yeah. So, but that realm of like, when I saw her and she was like, okay, get your blood work, bring everything in. And she's like, well, yes, all your blood work's normal, but your thyroid is actually high normal for your age. So why don't we address that with diet and all of this now before it crosses from, I don't know the numbers, 98 to 101, because you're not considered high until 101. But it's like, there's a little bit more art behind that, like you're in range or out of range. If you only look at that one column on your blood work, you're missing a lot. I think. So like, that's kind of my dream provider that looks at that and says, look, this isn't an issue, or look, it is over. Let's start you with some traditional medicine. However, we know that sleep, meditation, carnivorous vegetable diets are all super important for the health of this. Either here's some resources or here's somebody to talk to. And that's kind of like my dream for providers in general.
Yeah, it's interesting. Go ahead.
I have these conversations a lot with, physicians. I know many physicians, and I'm a fan of, doing in-depth testing in the functional medicine world. And, what's needed really is like, you need a physician who can diagnose disease if it's there, and maybe, who's at least open to talking about nutrition and the importance of movement in your life and all of these other, meditation and getting sleep regulated, and bringing attention to lifestyle. And there's many different ways to do that. And then like even a coach, a health coach in the practice, because we know, a lot of excuses physicians say is, well, I tell patients to eat better, but they don't. So I'm, why even bother? Well, people, they don't know how to, or there's many, many challenges to doing that in our world. And so, like we actually, there's many coaches out there, but we also have started a coaching certification where people learn meditation, they learn to teach meditation, they learn lifestyle, Ayurvedic lifestyle, and then you have all these tools to help people make change in their lives. Yeah. And so, and again, some of the most unhealthy people I know are physicians, because they're not doing these practices. So how are they going to help people learn how to do them in their own lives? So, I mean, an ideal model would be, these extenders of, the physicians to help people actually create change in their lives. And then we would prevent so many things that, like you said, why wait till things get out of, control, and then you actually have disease? Why not focus on prevention, which is, what a lot of traditional healing systems, their goal was prevention. Yeah. And not just prevention, but creating health on a daily basis,
Right. Which is like habit formation, right? And like, again, that is that ground of, it is that ground of, if you have the population acting and getting these resources so that they can instill it, that will make, when something does come up, when they do need the healthcare provider, it makes that interaction much more high value to them, because they're practicing good health. So when something goes awry, hopefully it is more around an acute event versus something chronically where you really have to dig for that solve. And I'm sure you probably have great stories doing stuff like that, where people who have been doing this are much more treatable when they come in.
Absolutely. Yeah. And in Ayurveda, there's a concept of progression of disease. We kind of have some examples of that in Western medicine. Like when I went to med school, though, there was no concept of prediabetes. And now we know it's like 10 years of kind of insulin resistance and a lot of metabolic changes before you actually become diabetic. But that everything's like that. You don't get disease, again, unless it's an acute situation like overnight. So in Ayurveda, it's built into the system that there's 6 stages of disease, and it's much easier to reverse something if it's early on, even before the onset of lab abnormalities and stuff, just not feeling right. There's something going on awry, right? And that's where we intervene a lot. Like, you're having digestive symptoms, let's fix that before it actually becomes disease. because it is a lot harder to reverse.
Yeah.
It's not impossible. In fact, we have many, many stories, and I've treated many people where they can reverse their disease and get off of meds and
Yep.
feel great.
Yep.
And then other people, they can at least manage their issues better. And
Yeah.
then, again, well-being and wellness, we're starting to research that with some collaborators because, that's a little hard to study, like
Yeah.
prevention of disease. You need long term to show this group of people that
Yeah.
were doing these things didn't get disease 30 years later.
Right.
And
that's so much of the problem with the studies that informed everything back in the day that we started this conversation off with the drug studies, right? They were like 1-2 year studies. We did a group, we say this, and like, we didn't evaluate anything 10 years down the road because we can't. Right. And like, how can you? So it's interesting that so much of where we got to today was built on these studies that didn't even take that long-term approach and probably didn't even recognize early onset disease.
Right. Yeah. And the how you can get things out of balance by just starting something and 20 years later still taking it. Like you said about the supplements, a lot of people, they've been on an antidepressant or some kind of medicine, and I'm definitely not anti. Some people, that's life-changing for them. Mm-hmm. But, there are a lot of people that got started on things because they were going through a hard time or someone, passed in their life or whatever. And then they just started on a med, and 20 years later, they're still on it. And I asked them, do you still need it? And like you said, they're scared to stop it. But this is where it's nice to have other tools. And like you may, experience this in PT, like, stop maybe try stopping this, and I'm going to give you something else to do so that they're not as scared to stop what they've been doing, and so like start meditating, and then let's talk about slowly weaning off your medication. And if you don't feel well, we can always go back up again. So then people know, like, so if you're willing to work with someone, they're more likely to do it, and you're giving them something to replace that. Whatever you're taking on.
I'll let you go, Al. We've had an episode on nocebos. What I love about this whole conversation is it feels like you avoid all of them, where doctors are saying, well, just stop that or just do this. Where even in that situation, you're allowing them to run parallel, wean off something while they're trying something. So it's in their head, like, okay, and it makes them more in tune with themselves. And I don't know if that was where you're going with that, Al, but we've touched on that a lot, where the healthcare practices today will just say one or zero binary, right. And that trial and error thing allows the patient to educate themselves and really look at how they're feeling and be in tune with that. So I like just everything you're saying, but I know, Al, you had a comment there.
Yeah, I think just a couple of things tying in is looking at just like everything's gotten too fancy versus like what are the global guidelines, right? So in movement, we talk about the WHO, what they've put out, 30 minutes a day. Sorry for the listeners, this is going to be harped on forever and ever, but 30 minutes a day of moderate to vigorous exercise, which is a 6 to 8 out of 10, and then 2 days of resistance training a week, and avoid inactivity. Like, those are the foundations. There's nothing more to that. Is that yoga? Sure. Is that running? Whatever. Is that weightlifting? Sometimes. Like, so, but those global basics, I know Matt put in, like, what we were talking about, like the primal movements, like we all do these movements. Yes. And it's almost like with nutrition, like we all know what the cornerstone, we talked about this, but we all know that there's carbohydrates and fats and proteins and minerals, but understanding those basics for everybody to start. And how you get back to that, or how you tweak that, is the individual side. And then, just our bodies are made to accommodate. They are made to accommodate. We're very resilient creatures, right? Like we're humans are resilient, whether you've had pain, disease, what have you, and we continue to accommodate. So if you've been doing the same machine circuit at the gym for 25 years, it's not really doing anything anymore. Right. Other than making you feel like you're getting exercise, which you are, but it's not as effective as if you were changing it and molding it and moving it. And from what you were saying, I'm almost seeing that from like nutrition and supplementation. It probably depends. I'm assuming like where you are in life. And, it's a smidge different when you're breastfeeding. It's a smidge different when you're premenopausal. It's a smidge different after, but you have to mold and change at the time. and need some guidance with that if we don't.
Yeah, that's such a great point. And it's one of the things I think people sometimes also are part of the problem. I'm sorry, but it's true because they want a solution. They want the one thing, or they want, what should I do? Like you said, for exercise, and I'm just going to keep doing that because that's what I was told.
That's that marketing and advertising thing that we've grasped as consumers. Yeah.
Yes. But in Ayurveda, it's based again on this concept that our body is constantly changing too. Like we're just a physical experience, our body on these molecules are constantly changing, and the seasons of our lives and the climate outside. And so Ayurveda is all about, what do I need right now? And so it brings that point, Ali, that you mentioned of like, there's some basics, and then you have to tweak it. If you do the same thing all the time, that's not good. Right. And even like eating seasonally, there's lots of research on the microbiome that our bacteria even cycle through the seasons because our body's constantly taking in information from our environment and making adjustments because that's what nature does. And yet we're eating the same thing every day. And, it makes sense. Is it healthy food? Yes. But is it the right food right now for you and what's going on?
That's a great springboard. So one, I'd love to get like practical and tactical. If you could get into the Ayurveda, like what is it? Break it down for our listeners. That would be a good, I think, great takeaway for people. But based on that and how that fits environmentally and seasonally is interesting. We had a natural bison rancher farmer from Wisconsin. North Star Bison is the company, but they don't put a blade, like she said, really we're grass farmers. So they don't do anything, and then they don't put steel, they don't mow, they don't crop the bison, they just move the herd around, and they're ethically raised and all that. And they have 600 to 800 bison. It's like 30 months to raise just like one of them so that they can then harvest it ethically and then bring it to market. So much with like the N of 1 of healthcare, I was asking her like, well, then how do we feed a nation to get away from industrial farming and all this stuff? And I go, will it be is it almost seasonal the way fruits and vegetables come in out of season? Is it, all right, the bison harvest is best this time of year based on mating. Elk and venison is this time of year, and fish and seafood. I go, do we need to look at meat and protein sources that way too, where there's these peaks and valleys of what's in season and what's not? She said yes. For the most part, because of just logistics of raising and harvesting and mating and all that stuff. But so does that premise kind of align with Ayurveda? And then also what, again, I think that would be good for our listeners. Like, what is it? What are the core tenets, principles, and how do you customize it for people as they come into your practice?
So Ayurvedic nutrition is a very sophisticated science, but yet there are some basic principles that everyone can follow. And then the more you learn, the more you realize there's more to learn. But in general,
it's the podcast. Just tease the people, get them grounded, and then again, do your research, like learn and
we have lots of information on chopra.com.
Perfect.
And actually I do an IG live every Wednesday at noon Pacific time on various topics, but they're all saved on the at Chopra IGTV also.
Okay.
So people can go back and look at, food as medicine from an Ayurvedic perspective. So I really, encourage, if you're interested, we have lots of information.
We'll put up on YouTube, we'll put links to anything you want. So after this conversation, just fire it away to us, and it will live there in perpetuity, so.
Oh, awesome. Yeah. And so one of the basic concepts in Ayurveda is the 6 tastes. So all food can be categorized into one or more of 6 different tastes. And that's, now we know the molecular, sort of constructs of foods, and we classify them as whether they're fats or proteins or carbohydrates or, fruits or vegetables. But in Ayurveda, it had to do with the effect they have on our body. So, and the qualities in those foods. And so, before molecular labs and everything, the idea was if you get a little bit of something from each of these 6 categories in every meal, then you're giving your body everything it needs. So some categories were about macronutrients, some categories were about micronutrients, some categories were about, and even in the micronutrients, it could be vitamins and minerals, or it could be various phytonutrients that communicate with our genes and our digestive tract to support our digestion and detoxification, our liver pathways. So food can be used as medicine. And if, again, each of these different tastes, the 6 tastes, which are sweet, sour, salty, pungent, bitter, and astringent, and there's all different kinds of foods that fit into each category. And it becomes really easy to get a little bit from each category, and then you feel satisfied. Your body feels satisfied, and it can do what it's supposed to do because you gave it all of these different things. And that you should rotate, variety, right? Because each plant, each food gives us different benefits. So within each category, you don't only want to pick the one food, you want to have some variety. And Ayurveda is based on the cycles of nature. So it was very much like seasonal eating. And most traditional cultures, right, they were eating seasonally. They had to. So what plants and berries were coming up at this time? What animals were in abundance at this time? Yeah. It's not like they ate the same thing all year. That's never been the case. Right. And now, we do that.
They had to find it.
Exactly. Yeah. So get some activity in there. Yeah. But yeah, so the 6 tastes is something that everyone should follow. And then depending on your mind body type, there are certain recommendations of which categories you should get a little bit more of in your diet and which ones you might want to minimize a little bit. So, for example, some mind body types that, tend to hold on to fluid or, have congestive tendencies. Yeah. The salt and, some of the other categories, the heavier foods, you minimize, not that you don't eat them, but you minimize them. That can include meat, but, and then you eat more of maybe pungent, bitter, astringent, which are a lot of the vegetables and spices. Spices really stimulate our digestion and metabolism, and they're really lacking in like the standard American diet. And they're loaded with anti-inflammatories and antioxidants. Those little spices, you don't know, they do a lot.
You're like turmeric, curry, stuff like that. Turmeric,
exactly.
Curry,
yeah, cumin, coriander. It doesn't have to be like spicy hot, but the savory spices. Yeah, fennel, coriander, cumin, turmeric, black pepper. Yeah. But just salt and pepper in recipes is not enough. Right. And so and again, a lot of people assume Ayurvedic eating is vegetarian. It doesn't have to be. In fact, a lot of physicians would prescribe meat for those mind body types that needed a little heavier food. Yeah. But there is a recognition that heavy can make us dull. It can make us gain weight. It can make us feel dull, in the mind. And that plant-based, it is primarily a plant-based approach to eating. Right. But again, it's looking at what do you need right now? What are your needs? How to eat a variety through the 6 tastes and how to support your digestion. So a little ginger tea in the morning or lemon with warm water. A lot of people just start drinking warm water with lemon in the morning, and that really gets the digestion stimulated for the day. Ginger with a little bit of ginger even, which is a great anti-inflammatory. Again, how you eat is really important in Ayurveda. So eating your biggest meal in the middle of the day when our digestive enzymes and hydrochloric acid and everything is ready to digest. But unfortunately, our society is around eating our biggest meal in the evening and then we just sit, right? Yeah. And there are a lot of studies that confirm if you eat most of your calories before 3 p.m. at least, you're going to have better weight management. Ayurveda has always talked about fasting, so that's nothing new. Yeah. But people, again, try to do it in a little bit of a fad or trendy way, but they always said, eat dinner, light dinner, fast overnight. And now we know metabolically that's really important for weight management. Yeah. And then, don't eat between meals unless you're one of those mind body types or you're doing extra activity that you physically need, more food. Right. So again, it's always like, it depends, right? What's going on in your life? What's your mind body type? And we have a quiz online at chopra.com. People can take, it's called a dosha quiz, to help them figure out.
There's 3 types, right? I believe.
Yeah. So there's the light and airy types, the vatas. They're the fiery types, which are the pittas, and then there's kind of the more grounded earth and water types, kaphas. Yeah. And there's also a field of study called Ayurgenomics that's looking at, people do have genetic differences. Right. And what you eat, how much activity you do, your tendencies toward disease are very much matching, and can be predicted through these types.
Yeah. So, and again, it's interesting to see where these different philosophies, some of the foundations of just good practices always cross over. So the weight loss expert we had on last, and again, I've been like a big gym head my whole life and lifting weights. So like, I'm never going to go away from the animal protein, but like the foundation of adding spices to it, when you eat and the timing, this is where somebody like me would be like, okay, I'm going to work with you. This is really interesting stuff. I'm healthy, but like I can take best practices and monitor how I feel. But one of the things that, again, whether it's intermittent fasting, which is or time restricted eating, which is, such a, again, those are just buzzwords. Like,
right. I
remember in the 80s, they just said, stop having the midnight snack. That's basically what that is today. It's just rebranded with a cool word. But, he was saying one of the very first keys is just to stop his clients eating 3 hours before bed. Right. Mm-hmm. And just by doing that, they can start working backwards and slowly changing their habits. And whether the biggest meal comes at the end or the middle of the day, just by doing that small change gets the ball rolling. It's that first domino effect. Because you need that recovery time to get good sleep. And I imagine the heavier meal, the later you get towards your bedtime, is a big thing in Ayurveda.
It is. Yeah. In Ayurveda, there's also this appreciation of circadian rhythms. So
that's exactly what he was talking about.
Yeah, the system's trying to do different things at different times, and if we can align our routine with that, we're going to optimize our health. If we're doing something different than what the body wants to do at that time, we're going to interfere with what it's trying to do. Like at night, when we eat, the digestion can't shift into this, a different metabolic state when it's working on digestion. Or if we're awake till all hours of the night, which again, this is not about perfection. This is about just having an appreciation. Correct. I didn't sleep well for a few nights. I stayed up. So now I'm going to get back on track. Because there's certain times of the night, even where we're cleaning up all the debris in our brain. We're consolidating memory. There's a lot going on. So if we're awake during that time, we lost that healing time, so this is why you see in all, dementia research and Alzheimer's, like sleep. It's so important.
It's sleep. And then, like you said, food is medicine. And on our podcast, we talk about how movement is medicine. It's just like. Absolutely. In
Ayurveda, they say movement is life. So, anything in the body that's not moving stagnates and you get disease. And that includes, our body moving. That includes, again, keeping things moving internally through the ducts and through all the channel. And
in addition to like the 3 times of a week where we say you should formally exercise, like one of the recommendations is just not be sedentary. So again, the 7,500 to 10,000 steps per day is in addition to whatever you do exercising. That should be time spent moving your body. It's a principle we cover here, and again, if it might vary from philosophy to philosophy, but the fact that you shouldn't be sitting still. And with so much screen time, I think that message just has to keep being like peppered through the BB gun at the consumers today, because it's just a habit that I'm sure you probably see in your practice when people come in. It's just like, even if they are active, it's only for that 1 or 2 hours they exercise, then they just sit the rest of the day.
Yeah, you probably see this a lot too, Allie. I get a lot of people that when I start talking to them about exercise, they're like, oh, well, I'm really active. I walk around at work. And it's like, that's great. That's great. And I'm like, that's good that you don't have just a sedentary job. And you also need to take that other extra time to do different types of movements and, more focused exercise.
I mean, absolutely. People will say that all the time, or even blue collar workers who are pumping, that are working all day. I have a family member right now who, her knees hurt, and I'm like, she's like, I'm up and down all day long. I'm on the ground. I'm up. I'm like, okay. And then she's like, I don't know what physical therapy is going to do for me. And I said, okay. But the problem then lies in us. If we give you exercises that don't challenge you, it won't change you. Right. So there's that, again, that accommodation and that zone people have to find, where if people are either told that that's good, good job for moving, that's great, that's plenty, they've been told that. And then some people have been told, oh yeah, you're strong because you do this. Like runners, for example, they come in and they can't do a single leg squat, and I'm like, how are you running? You know, like
Right.
like it's a movement pattern, it's in there. So they don't realize that there's areas to work. And that is where I preach about the primal movements of, you got to get all of these ingredients, not just the one. Walking is
Yeah.
one. You're
Right.
doing fantastic there.
Right.
What about
Right.
these other ones?
Yes.
And then we work from there. So I totally agree. I mean, and I see that all the time with hearsay from people with eating and nutrition of what they think they're doing and what they're missing.
Yeah.
Very parallels to movement.
Yeah, and that's something, you know, we've talked about with Allison being on the back end of the healthcare system. She sees all these habits compiled, so she has to go back to the starting line, which most PTs won't do in a practice, because again, they're in that system where they're seeing 10 patients at once and their time is stretched thin. So in her practice, she can go back to the drawing board and be like, geez, you should have been working on all this stuff with your primary care or with a personal trainer, somebody on the front end. So, you know, PTs like her are kind of taking that 360 approach. Like, yeah, you blew your ACL and we're going to work on strengthening that knee, but we're going to start looking at your shoulders and not your posture. I know Allison scolds me with my language sometimes because I'm the novice, but you know, just the manner in which your body, you know, your posture, for lack of better description, and how your shoulders and your lower back are supporting your legs and how it all works together. And we're going to put a comprehensive exercise program together. You're not coming in here just doing the leg extension to get your knee stronger, which is part of like many traditional PTs. So
one of the things I get the most frustrated with is when I'm sending people to PT, as you know, in my practice, is, you know, everything's connected. And so like if I send someone with a code for low back pain, they're required to just treat them for that. But they also, of course, have shoulder pain and neck pain and this. So, you know, and they only get a certain number of visits approved. So like someone will go in and say they're there for their back pain, and they assume because their shoulder hurts too that they're going to address that. But then they'll come back and say, oh, you know, they told me they couldn't address that because that's not what I was sent for. And it's so frustrating.
Oh, it's so hard. I go nuts, and like even like mentoring, you know, others, like I don't ever mind when the body chart is full of X's with pain because it doesn't change my approach.
Right.
I'm still going to find the hardest thing you can do, and I'm still going to work you, and I'm still going to find entries into movements that you can do that feel good, that create positivity and all of that. But yeah, that is a crawl right there in me.
Yeah, we had a whole episode on back pain, like five myths,
and it's not
right. It's the whole body. Yeah,
you're not just a back or just a shoulder or just
right. And I mean,
that's the reductionist approach, which doesn't work. Yeah,
which doesn't work. And I think, you know, and to your point, you know, there's the ground up and the top down, right? So like, and Matt and I are, you know, we kind of play the roles, like he's hard on the people and I'm hard on the practitioners of like, why are, and Matt's like, change yourself. And I'm like, well, it's not really their fault. Like if you go and nobody's educated you that, you know, your back, and it could be your foot that's the issue that's causing both of those. Like, and again, that to me was well beyond PT school, right? Like that was more continuing ed, trial and error, mentorship programs I've taken part in, teaching that I've tried to do. But in the PT program, you got a glimpse at what the regional interdependent approach looked like. But then you're right. Then you get into insurance world, and it's like it's your low back code. You know, what is it? M54.5, right? So you get to your low back code, and then forget if you're dealing with workers' comp or no fault. You can't literally can't. You honestly can't touch something else, or they're going to, if you ever got claimed against, or it's crazy.
Yeah.
So getting that out of there and your verbiage of how to connect the dots becomes the art of saying like, oh, well, you know, when you're documenting or whatever, this is all connected and this is how and why needs work.
Definitely needs work. And again, it's like doing a lot of things together, because like you have to talk about food when you're talking about inflammation in the body, or, you know, even the body healing itself. You need all the building blocks to do that. You know, how you're going to create new tissue if you're not you know, giving your body the nourishment it needs, because food actually creates our body, right?
Right.
And so, you know, we need this sort of more, you know, systematic approach to
Yeah.
health. And it's too bad, like even in med school, I was just talking to someone recently who said, you know, some specialty panel said recommended, I don't know that it's required yet, but that in med schools they teach at least, you know, 25 hours of nutrition, which imagine being a doctor and I got like 2 hours of a nutrition class, and it was mostly about molecularly what vitamin D looks like, and if you don't have enough you get rickets. There was nothing about like how to eat for optimal health.
It's gonna
And
drive you hungry. Yeah.
then they did a survey of a lot of medical schools, and they showed that they actually were getting so much less than that, even though it's recommended to focus on nutrition more. They were still getting between 2 to 8 hours only. And it's, again, tends
Yeah.
to be a very molecular approach to nutrition and disease oriented, not like how to
Yeah.
eat optimally, you
I
know?
think
So,
this is where
Very, there's actually research like that in the musculoskeletal world that shows where the knowledge is and what MDs get versus PTs. Like PTs, we get no pathophysiology, like very little cellular stuff. Like we don't get that. We get enough, hopefully, to recognize when it's not in our realm and get somebody out of our realm. Like, okay, this isn't sounding musculoskeletal. Let's clear X, Y, and Z first, and then come back to me. But there was a study, gosh, it's probably 14 years old now, at least, but about musculoskeletal health in physicians and PTs. And the way it came out was that 80% of primary cares failed a basic musculoskeletal exam.
yeah.
Basic musculoskeletal, like basic, very simple. And
yeah.
it was a, you know, when we talked the study, I think it was between 200 and 300 physicians that were after. And then, and again, it's not a knock. You give me a pathophysiology one, I'm, you know, totally out. I think I'll do okay, but not great. Right. So, but then you look at like who has the most knowledge in musculoskeletal, and it's usually like orthopedics and neurologists, and then PTs with your doctor and a specialty are next. And then when you get down the chain, you know, there's not a lot of knowledge in internist and primary cares in general in the musculoskeletal system. That is not a knock. That is a recognition for people to say like, okay, maybe this isn't our strength, but how many visits to a primary care are musculoskeletal based?
Right. So many.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that Alice talked about. Like, why aren't the amount of push-ups, pull-ups, and the ability to do a body squat part of a primary care physical every year? Why aren't those vital signs that are tracked with all your blood work and stuff like that? Like, you know, and those are just like ideas that I like. I love that we have a podcast that we can like push that out and just like test the idea and see how people respond to it, or at least try it at home if you're a consumer. If I can't do these things, you know, I'll be more informed when I go into my doctor to push them towards getting me to the right place. But yeah, and that's been encouraging.
Like your view on that, you know, from the MD side, who is very comprehensive and, you know, a lifelong learner, you know, like what's your view on that from that side, not from me, PT preaching side, but with regards to physical assessment in our medical world?
I mean, it's just like you said, it's severely lacking, you know, and it's very, all medical training is designed around diagnosing and treating disease once it's there. There's nothing about optimal health or you know, very little in prevention. And most prevention is based on early detection of cancers or, you know, preventing infectious disease through vaccinations. But otherwise, preventing chronic illness and pain, we get nothing, you know. And even I used to mentor, you know, medical students at the center here, and I had in my practice as well. And I always pick their brains and I ask them, how much of this education are you getting? How much of that? And it's sad how little has changed in the 25 years that I went to med school. And so, yeah, it's severely lacking. I do find that a lot of my friends who are DOs, obviously that's a little bit more of their training. But yeah, it's not taught, or if it is taught as part of a physical assessment, I mean, we are supposed to, you know, look at, you know, range of motion of the joints and, you know, but like, yeah, not necessarily until, especially with older people, until they have problems, like assess their muscle strength and are they getting weaker
It's almost like
someone
that,
comes in
those
and
stages of
no,
disease almost. It's those early onsets of injury that you could potentially be evaluating that we're
exactly. And
probably
the
not right now
time,
at scale. Yeah.
exactly. And like I used to, be much more comprehensive when I was in Wisconsin, which is where I'm from, and in a practice. And it was a smaller community. We had a little bit more autonomy than a lot of physicians have. I used to insist I needed 45 minutes if I was going to do a physical, and it would include a lot more assessment, like all of the things you're talking about, squatting and, you know, arm strength, and like you had time to do that. When they're requiring you to do a physical in 20 minutes, you're just like, is there anything life threatening here? And if
Right.
not, next.
Yeah.
That's part of the challenge too, is that, we are taught some of these things and they're supposed to be part of our exams and physicals, but a lot of physicians, they just don't have time, or once you learn about it, you forget. It's not part of our awareness.
That's been a common theme with Al, how she's been saying sometimes it takes the research out there on the way to move your body and prevent all these like it's actually out there. It's 10, 15, 20 years old, but it takes that long to actually
Yes.
reach and be implemented. And
Yes.
it's probably a similar thing you saw with Ayurveda and yoga and meditation, everything Chopra preaches. Like it was not chastised, but it was given this other label, and the studies are out there. It's like, and they've probably been done for over 10 years,
Yes.
but it's now like people are seeing either actual tangible results or doctors are becoming better and providers are becoming better at actually reading it and learning how to implement it, which is, I come from the business world. It's like the data and the machine learning and the use of metrics has just been something companies just say to sound cool. Yeah, we're investing in machine learning, but they don't improve their sales because they just invent in the technology. It's the same. It feels like the same thing with research that's starting to creep in, but the implementation, the use of that data,
Yes.
putting it
Yes.
into practice feels like there's this lag that I don't know how you.
I would
how to
100%
speed it
agree
up.
with that. Yeah. And I mean, people have looked at that and they say it takes at least 10 to 20 years for
Allison's
clinical,
yeah.
whatever studies to impact practice guidelines. That's too
Yeah.
long,
It's too long.
that's too long. Yeah. So again, there are people that are looking at this, it's called translational medicine. It's like, how can we translate these studies that are being done more quickly into clinical practice? We can't wait 20 years, to change when we know
And
better ways to
Especially with
do
all
things.
the everything we have now. I mean, it's that to me, and I've said this before, is Twitter. Like I follow people, and as they're publishing research, and if it's something that something that's pertinent to me, I'll flag people so I get notified, and then I'll take that and then read it, and then take that and read it, and
Right.
without that, I wouldn't, number one, have the time to find it, to look for it and all that, or see it just in front of me. So like that's what from a healthcare provider standpoint, that's what I teach my students, is you have to just dump it in front of you and then make time to read it. But you have to, it has to be in your face every single day, or you're not going to do it when you get busy and life gets busy and all that. It has to be something that's easy and comes at you. So
Right.
yeah, that translational research is a big deal to try to move us forward. Yeah.
Exactly.
It's the beauty of social media, how to crowdsource it. And I think because social just became this thing to just tweet and post fun things, like, and just became an attention suck. Now I think people are starting to finally utilize how to get, and again, it's in the business world, how to get their message out, how to get a brand out. And now, you're doing Instagram Live every week, and Allison's basically crowdsourcing and doing research on Twitter just to get studies that then lead her down the right rabbit holes, from good sources. So that business aspect of healthcare, to use it to your advantage versus just creating a monetized system, feels like it's shifting. It just feels like, again, I always say
Too slow for us, right?
too slow, right? I mean, it's just too slow for the West and how fast we move. But if it's 10 years before something hits the market and we know it works, I think maybe that's just a gap, and we need more of those translators. Maybe it's not, we need more. I was asking how we scale. Maybe we don't need more doctors, nurses, and people. We need more translators to bring them the information and then know how to use it to curate, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, there's they created an amazing system of teaching physicians about all the newest drugs out there. You know, I used to work in practices where the drug reps
Great
were there
point.
at lunch,
Yep.
bringing you pizza and, you know, and
Yeah.
dessert, you know,
Yeah.
terrible food, and teaching you
Right?
about, teaching
Terrible
you
food.
about, yeah, about their
Yeah.
next best drug. And so, you know, and it's in your head and you're like, yes, okay, I got
Yeah.
it. And the next time you see someone, you recommend it.
Right.
Why not have, you know, why can't we integrate that into, so people are coming and
Yeah.
teaching physicians about all these other things? Like you
Yeah.
said, in your face, bring healthy lunch. So,
Right. Yeah, it's
and
just building the incentives around the system to do that, right? I mean, we don't have to go down the rabbit hole. I'm like a very small, limited government guy, but if you're here in New York City, you know that the parking meter run by the government is the most efficient market ever run. We're like, why can't the government recreate this and everything else in our finances? But you leave your car for 5 minutes in one place in New York City, they're all over it. So where the incentives are there, and there's a way to monetize it, and a way to, you know, I guess we just need to learn how to monetize prevention and education more, even though it's happening, and getting the message out. And
yeah, you know, I am hopeful, you know, getting back to like how, you know, sometimes I get into these spaces where I think, oh, is anything ever going to change? Because it's like a big monster, the healthcare system, to try to change. But, you know, you see like these big academic centers starting integrative medicine, you know, centers. Unfortunately, they're separate from the you know, wheel, and so people, it's called integrative medicine, but it's actually not yet truly integrated into, like, you know, all the other departments. But at least it's happening, it's there. There's more
their
research.
mission.
Yeah. And so, you know, it's happening slowly, but there are other pieces that need to be fixed, like the payment system, even at other levels of like kind of societal, placing importance on nutrition and healthy movement, and, you know, so, but I'm hopeful. I'm definitely more hopeful, you know, year by year.
I think more people like you that's been adopting research, educating that, and then, you know, what Allison's doing, again, it feels like maybe a intermediate short-term fix by just breaking away and not even being a part of the system, creating these cash-based practices where people realize, you know, and we talked about with the bison farmer too, like investing in good, whole, nutritious foods versus, you know, industrial process. Like the dollars you're expending up front today are just preventing a hidden tax that you're saving if you go the other route down the road.
Absolutely. You know, I think all these things on like, people are spending this much on wellness and this much on personal trainers and da-da-da. And it's like, okay, yeah, healthcare, you should pay attention. People are putting their money on what they feel is important. And we should look at that and say, hey, we're not serving people well, and they are willing to go out and pay for it. So how can we integrate this into healthcare? Because it's important to people. And again, there's lots of data that shows that these things are important, you know, and so you're right. You know, when people go out and access, you know, different sorts of practitioners and healing modalities, we should pay attention to that.
Very cool. You know, great talk. I think we're, you know, kind of at the end here. So if there's anything, like, where can, again, we'll put everything in our YouTube comments. We'll link and I'll connect with your people after on anything they want to link further. But you know, where can people find you? Let's plug your Instagram live again when you do that, and and then, you know, anything you're working on that you want that's up and coming in the Chopra world, or, and, you know, last few minutes here. The floor is yours.
All right. My marketing team, you know, they make them, you know, proud of me here. I'm not a salesperson, but there's so many things we're doing at Chopra, again, to like bring these things to everyone and really make them accessible at all levels, because we recognize, you know, we have these retreats and events that are going to be starting up, you know, toward the end of the year and into 2022 now that we can. But also, you know, so we have events. Go to chopra.com and look at our retreats and events. We have the whole health program at CIVANA in Arizona, CIVANA Wellness Resort and Spa. You can see that. That's more of an immersion. You get these Ayurvedic massages, which is so great for tissues, herbalized oils. You're eating healthy, amazing plant-based food. You're doing meditation, yoga, and learning tools to take into your day-to-day life. So it's an immersion, so a little bit more of an investment. But then we also have our Chopra Meditation and Wellbeing app, where we have meditations and, sound healing and,
Awesome.
I started doing a little Ayurvedic series to learn more about Ayurvedic lifestyle. Which we'll be building out more. Chopra.com has articles on all of the things we talked about. And then
Beautiful.
my IG Live
Yes.
every Wednesday at noon on @Chopra Instagram. And then we have our chief meditation officer. Cool, right? That we have a chief
Amazing.
meditation officer. He does meditations every morning at 8:30, Monday through Friday. So people can join in. He's amazing.
Right.
And just lots of stuff going on Instagram. We have a, series with, a couple of regular series, going on Instagram as well. So,
Yeah.
and our IGTV has all of the videos saved. So
Right.
people can go back and
And
watch.
there's no need.
So I think, yeah,
There's no, and
that
there's
was a
no,
mouthful.
yeah. Well, we can put all that, and there's no need to plug Deepak himself, because he's already got X million followers. So we're
Exactly.
we're
And we're,
good.
we're really look for partnerships too. One of the big things we're trying to do is create partnerships with other places that are doing amazing things, and then just maybe
Very cool.
integrating our practices and what we do into these spaces. So we're opening up the
Yeah.
Chopra Mind Body Zone at
Yeah.
Lake Nona, which is a well-being community or outside of Orlando, Florida.
Yeah.
So I'll be out there for that soft opening this summer, next month.
Very cool.
So yeah, we're just trying to find new ways to
Full presence,
give people
direct to
access.
consumer. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's, me and Elle have been talking about creating an app with her practice. So we
Be
should,
amazing. Yeah.
yeah, it just, just educational tools, quick hitters, to at least just implant in people's heads, like, this is where I can go to start the education process. It won't maybe give me all the answers, but it will lead me right down the right path. So no, I'm glad that places like you guys have grown so big, so that at least the resources are there, and it's just getting pointing people in the right direction, right? So
Exactly.
very cool. Thank
So
you.
thanks for having me on the
Thank
podcast.
you
Yeah,
so
thanks for joining us.
Pleasure.
Everyone, you know what to do. Hit the like and subscribe down below, and this will be out in probably next week, early July. So the weather's gonna be beautiful. So everyone get outside, move your body, eat healthy, get some good sleep, drink that water, and we'll see you on the next episode.